Good afternoon. Let us come to order and go on the record. I am Tanola D. Brown Bland with the North Carolina Utilities Commission, the presiding commissioner for this hearing. And with me this afternoon are Commission Chair Charlotte A. Mitchell and Commissioner Jeffrey A. Hughes. I now call for order hearing docket number W-1328 sub 4 and W-1040 sub 10. In the matter of application for transfer of public utility franchise of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. to Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, doing business as Redbird Water, filed pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-111 and Commission Rule R7-37. On December 4th, 2020, Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. and Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, doing business as Redbird Water, filed a joint application with the Commission seeking authority to transfer the utility system and public utility franchise serving the Bear Den Acres Development to Redbird and for approval of rates. Between March 29th and October 6, 2021, the applicants filed supplemental materials in support of the joint application. On January 5th, 2022, the Commission issued an order scheduling hearing, establishing discovery guidelines, and requiring customer notice. On January 21st and February 7th, 2022, Redbird filed notice that it had provided the required notice of this hearing to Bear Den's customers. On February 11th, 2022, Redbird filed the direct testimony of Josiah Cox. And between February 28th and March 25th, 2022, 4 customers filed statements objecting to the proposed transfer. Public staff's participation and intervention in this matter is recognized pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 62-15D, and there are no other interveners in this matter. On March 2nd, 2022, the public staff and Redbird filed a settlement agreement and stipulation purporting to resolve all contested issues in this docket. On March 18th, 2022, the public staff filed the testimony of D. Michael Franklin in support of the stipulation. On March 18th, 2022, Redbird filed supplemental testimony of Josiah Cox in support of the stipulation. On March 21st, 2022, Redbird posted a $75,000 bond with the Commission, which was the agreed upon amount reflected in the stipulation. In compliance with the requirements of the State Government Ethics Act, I remind all members of the Commission of our duty to avoid conflicts of interest, and I inquire at this time whether any member of the Commission has a known conflict of interest with regard to these dockets. The record will reflect that no conflicts were identified. And I now call upon counsel for appearances, and I'll begin with the applicant.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dan Higgins with Burns, Day and Presnell, appearing on behalf of Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC.
Good afternoon, Mr. Higgins.
Good afternoon. Megan Yost with the public staff representing the using and consuming public.
Good afternoon, Ms. Yost. Good to see you both back and in person.
Indeed.
All right, are there preliminary matters that we need to address or straighten out before we start the hearing?
None that I'm aware of.
All right, then Mr. Higgins, the case is with the applicant.
Thank you. I call to the stand Mr. Josiah Cox. You're right there.
Mr. Cox, if you will, after you get settled in, place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly and sincerely swear that the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Right.
Mr. Cox, would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Josiah Cox.
And what's your business address?
It is 1650 DePere Road, Suite 303, DePere, Missouri, 63131.
And how are you employed, Mr. Cox?
I'm the president
President
of Central States Water Resources, LLC.
And what is your relationship to the applicant or one of the applicants in this docket, Redbird Utility Operating Company?
Redbird Utility, I'm the president of Redbird Utility Operating Company, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of CSWR LLC.
Did you cause to be prepared and filed on February 11th, 2022, direct testimony in this docket consisting of 27 pages of questions and answers and one exhibit?
I did.
Any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
None.
Did you also cause to be prepared and filed on March 18th, 3 pages of supplemental testimony?
I did.
Any changes or corrections to that testimony?
None.
At this time, Commissioner Brown-Bland, I'd move the admission of the pre-filed direct and supplemental testimony and the exhibit attached to the direct testimony.
All right, the pre-filed direct testimony and the pre-filed supplemental testimony of Mr. Cox will be received into evidence and treated as if given orally from the witness stand. The one attached exhibit to his direct pre-filed will be identified as it was marked when pre-filed.
Thank you. Commissioner, because of the Commission's recent order identifying issues to be addressed, at least some of the issues to be addressed, and the parties' stipulation and settlement agreement, I had not prepared a summary of Mr. Cox's testimony. I would propose to move to questions that focus on the issues identified in the recent order, but I'll take guidance from you as to how we should proceed.
That will be fine, and it is perfectly okay to dispense with any summary.
All right. Mr. Cox, have you had an opportunity to review the Commission's recent order identifying at least some of the issues that are to be addressed in the hearing today?
I have.
Would you start by explaining the corporate structure of the Central States Water Resources family and its relationship with Redbird Utility Operating Company and why that structure is utilized?
Yes. So Central States Water Resources, we're an investor-owned utility company that I founded. Our business model is to purchase and acquire small, typically failing water and wastewater systems across the country. We go to state markets. We built a database of every single water and sewer system in the U.S. And we separated states based on how much fragmentation, means how many small systems they have, and how much environmental distress, so typically EPA violations. So when we identify a state like North Carolina to come into, we enter the state and we go to see if we can sign enough contracts with potential sellers of systems that fit into this category of systems. And if we get critical mass of that many systems, of enough systems, we form a wholly owned subsidiary to operate in that state. Thus, Redbird Utility Operating Company is the wholly owned subsidiary of CSWR LLC. And the reason for that is so that when we do any case proceedings, it all stays at the state level. So the financials, all that are ring fenced as much as possible at the state level for commission proceedings. So that's the relationship.
Mr. Cox, let me ask you this. What is the utility operating company here that proposes to acquire the Bear Den water system is Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, correct?
Correct.
And what is its corporate parent's name?
It's Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC, which is then wholly owned by CSWR LLC.
And when you say CSWR, you mean Central States Water Resources?
Correct.
Okay. Are you also aware of the reference in the recent commission order to potential questions about something called the Bear Den Water Association?
We heard of the Bear Den Water Association on Thursday of last week.
Right. Is that when you first heard that term?
It is.
Okay. When did you first become aware of the commission's order from 1993 regarding the public utility status of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc.?
Yeah, the public utility staff was able to get us a copy of that 1993 order because it wasn't online on Friday.
And what information can you provide at this time about the Bear Den Water Association in terms of what has Redbird been able to pull together since learning of this issue?
Yeah, we've got a couple of findings on this. So we're made aware of the Water Association, like I said, on Thursday. As of right now, we can't find any record of its existence in terms of the North Carolina Secretary of State. We received that 1993 CPCN case on Friday. So in a snapshot, in terms of how we view this, we're purchasing the utility, Redbird is purchasing the utility from the entity that holds the CPCN Baird Acres Development, Inc. After title work, which we do on all these systems, we discovered that the parent company of Baird Acres Development, which is called Baird Mountain Resort, Inc., owns some of the water line areas that provide service to the community. We have title records showing the original property owners, the Moody's, who owned this whole area before it was developed into a subdivision, conveyed this additional water line property that, to Baird Mountain Resort. And this is very typical what we see in these small kind of mom and pop developer-owned systems across the country. Bad title work, poor recording of deeds, they're not set up to be a regulated utility. Oftentimes don't take the time to make sure that the property records are in order. So there's nothing we've not seen across the country involved in this type of situation. Since this Baird Mountain Resort is the same owner as the Baird Acres Development, we don't feel we have any problem cleaning up the title on this issue, pre-closing.
Or have you reviewed the restrictive covenants, which were part of the 1993 proceeding, which purported to convey the water lines from the developer entity to the Baird Water Association?
Yes, I read the 1993 order with that.
And those restrictive covenants, which I believe dated one from the 70s and one from the 80s, did they also address who was responsible for maintaining the water lines?
They did originally say that the Water Association should have been responsible for maintaining the water lines if it formed.
Thank you. If I could approach and hand out some exhibits, please.
Yes.
You have a copy? I'd like to first ask you to turn your attention to this document. Yes, sir. We'll call this Cox Exhibit 2. It's a document entitled Water Log. Do you know where this document came from?
Yes, the regulated utility that runs this water system supplied this to us.
And in fact, this was a document provided to the public staff in response to data requests in this docket, wasn't it?
Yes.
And tell the commission what this document shows.
So what you have here is a couple of years of records from the Baird utility describing different areas that they've done repair work on, replacement work on the water system from 2018 through 2021. It's time frames and locations and dates.
And does this include work on the water lines?
It does.
And now I'll ask you to look at this document, if you would, please, Mr. Cox, which
Just a minute, Mr. Higgins. So the first document we were discussing called a water log is 2 pages, and we will identify it as
I asked that we,
Redbird Cox Exhibit 2.
yes, ma'am, that'd be fine.
All right, you may continue.
This document, Mr. Cox, the document entitled, that the first page is the Philip Pittman invoice. I'd ask that that be labeled as Redbird Cox Exhibit 3.
All right, it will be so identified.
And Mr. Cox, can you tell us what this is and how it came into the possession of Redbird Utility Operating Company?
This is another series of invoices for various repair work, replacement work on the water system over the last number of years. It was given to us by the utility, Bear Den, and really just to demonstrate the work that's been ongoing over the last number of years. So you have motor replacements, you have electrical repairs, you have pump repairs, pump replacements. We actually have some chemical bills in here. That kind of a sundry different projects that happened inside the water system.
Are you aware of, well, let me ask you this. Was this documentation also provided to the public staff in response to data requests?
Yes.
Are you aware of any documentation reflecting that the Redbird Water Association has performed any maintenance on the water line or the water system at Bear Den at any time?
We're not aware of any of that, and all the bills paid for water service have been made out to the Bear Den Utility Company.
The witness is available for questions.
Is there any cross-examination for the witness, Ms. Yes?
No questions from the public staff. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Cox, I would like you to slowly go back over the corporate structure just a little bit. You mentioned the Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, is a subsidiary of a parent company. Is that correct?
So there are three corporate levels. The top corporate level, Central States Water Resources, LLC, which then when we stand up a state market, when we go into a new state, we set up a holding company and an LLC. So it's Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC, which wholly owns Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC.
All right, and then the holding, is that the holding company?
So the top level parent corporation is Central States Water Resources, LLC, which wholly owns Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC, which wholly owns Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC.
All right, thank you. And the purchase agreement, I believe, indicated a CSWR Inc. Is that an existing separate company?
That's the management company inside the Central States Water Resources, LLC. It's where the errors and it's where like the insurance, the board of directors is held and all that kind of stuff.
So the LLC sits on top.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, attachment G, I believe. I may be confused between attachments and exhibits, so I asked for counsel's assistance. But I have a confidential G, which is the agreement for sale of the utility. And all versions of G that the commission has been able to find have missing pages. Their pages appear to be missing. And that would be the pages 6 through 13. Is that something that can be provided?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I wasn't aware that there was anything missing.
All right.
So pages 6 through 13.
Yes. Trying to. So just to be clear and so that we have it for our record, we would like a full and complete copy of the agreement for sale of the utility system. That is identified in the application as confidential attachment G. Also, one of the exhibits to that attachment is Exhibit D, which speaks to the rights via the agreements and contract. And it has a blank in it. And so we'd like the completed and complete version.
Was that D, is in
D.
Dan?
D, this particular document is the assignment document.
We'll provide that right away.
All right, and I'm assuming they should remain confidential? Is that correct?
I believe the only redacted, I believe that the only thing redacted from the purchase agreement, the asset purchase agreement, is the actual purchase price, Commissioner. And yes, that we've been keeping the purchase price confidential.
And so the rest can be filed as a public document?
Yes, ma'am. And I believe we filed a redacted version of attachment G already.
Right, all right. So we would make that request that we get a full and complete copy with all the exhibits as well.
Understood.
The complete and final versions. Now, I believe that the documents do tell the story, but I want to ask and hear it from you, Mr. Cox. So, the management company, as you described it, CSWR Inc., entered into this purchase agreement with the purchase of Bear D and Acres Development. And assuming that the plan is to transfer the assets of Bear D into Redbird Operating Company, what can you tell us about the time frame and how all of that is expected to take place?
I believe the contract is signable, and we've already assigned that contract.
That's what that
over.
document is.
That's correct. So it's already been assigned over. That contract, the management company's already been assigned to Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC.
And that is a completed matter. There's no contingencies or parts left open.
I believe so, ma'am.
Okay. Now, all right. And I believe you explained that this is the process that you've used in other jurisdictions, the way that you're accomplishing coming in and purchasing and having the assets transferred. Is this a similar way that you do in all the other jurisdictions, or are there differences?
I believe ever since we started doing it, single state utility operating companies. So the last, I would call it 5 years, 6 years, that's been the method. So that is correct. So we've used that in 7 other state markets.
Now, will the transferee, Redbird, the operating company, be subject to any charges, fees, interest, or other liabilities that haven't been fully disclosed and discussed with the public staff?
I do not believe so, no, ma'am. We don't have to do any internal transfer pricing or anything.
And does the operating company or its parent or any of the affiliates in the network there own any other campground properties or have experience with serving campgrounds?
So are you asking in other states, do we service campgrounds, ma'am?
Yes, do the companies have any experience dealing with campgrounds?
Yes, we do.
All right. And are there, are campgrounds unique? Do they cause unique service issues?
It depends on the situation, how the infrastructure was originally put in, how the, bylaws or rules for the campground. So it really varies on a case-by-case basis. But yes, there can be unique circumstances.
Right, and not just I'm not requiring just about the legalities or the transactions as so much as the service. Do campgrounds cause service issues that are unique to campgrounds?
Ma'am, the only reason why I struggle to answer this question is because small water and sewer pose such unique challenges for every single small water and sewer system we buy that it's hard to differentiate if campgrounds are much different than almost any of those small systems we buy. So we've done campgrounds where we just had faucets attached to them, and people got charged a connection fee, but campgrounds there's volumetric basis. We have RV parks where there's a water filling station. So it really is pretty unique depending on the individual system.
How do they compare to service of residential? Or what you call, what you would designate as residential, single-family homes?
Yeah, it would be somewhat different, also depending how the tariff is set up to handle it, right? So is someone charged just a fee while they're there? Do they own it fee simple? There's a bunch of, kind of dynamics from our perspective on that.
Can you give us any quantification of your experience, the other experience? Number of campgrounds, maybe in the,
I don't know the
or
exact number.
percentages?
Yeah, I would say between RV parks and campgrounds, maybe we own 20 of them, something like that across the country. At this point, I think we own 440 systems across our footprint.
And there, the everyday problems of operating such, but are there any issues that are outstanding or stand out in your mind that those facilities have caused?
The only issue that comes to mind as we talk about is people leaving on their spigot when they take off, right? So they don't realize they left the water running, especially if they're filling a tank or something like that. If something comes to top of mind, but you quickly locate that because you realize you get this constant demand on your system.
What about communications with owners or users, I'll say?
So it depends if it's a rental situation, because then we're typically dealing with a property management or some type of ownership group. So the RV or campgrounds that are rented out, then we're dealing with that ownership group who then is, dealing with the user of the water, if you will. The other are typically fee simple, so we have contact information for the people who own the piece of property that's tied to our water system.
Have you developed a communications plan or a means to make sure that the intended messages are getting through to both users and owners?
Yes, ma'am. That's something we develop. It really, it's kind of carte blanche for us across the country. These small systems, it's oftentimes difficult to get down to the actual owners. A lot of the customer lists we get from sellers are incomplete. We've gotten things on notebook paper. I mean, you name it, index cards, the whole thing. So we do a lot of work, to verify all that owner information and try to send both written communication. We stand up a website, state specific. So Redbird, because we are already operating in the state, we have a, website, for customers. We use social media as well as another customer channel, so you can actually interact with us directly on our Facebook or Twitter page as well. So we try to do multiple avenues.
And when you're dealing with users of campground and RV facilities, that kind of thing, have you found what you do to be effective? How effective are you in actually knowing that people are receiving communications from you about the water, about the ownership, their billing, that kind of thing?
I believe we've been fairly effective. I've not had any trouble with systems we purchased in terms of not being able to deal with the eventual owner user of the system. Now, the only breakdown I can think of is when it's a rental property but then we're holding the company that owns the rental property responsible for that water usage.
Yeah, am I correct to think in these campgrounds that the users are either fairly changeable or on another level just transient? come and go?
It really depends on the type of property. So we see it's either the fee simple, so I'm just going to use the RV parks. They own a piece of property, they come visit on the weekends or holidays or vacation trips, right? Or it's the rental property where people are coming in and out, right? But it's owned by some type of management company is the way we've typically seen it.
I think you alluded to it in your earlier responses to Mr. Higgins, but explain to us how you came to have interest in acquiring Bear Den's Acres Development System.
So we're looking for small private, small typically privately owned water and wastewater utilities. Typically they need a change of ownership. They shouldn't be in the investor-owned utility world. I mean, so we look at it two ways. One is everyone is well aware of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Drinking Water Act is increasingly more stringent over time. So the system you built 25 years ago oftentimes doesn't meet modern EPA requirements. Beyond that, because utilities are not the primary business for most of these owners, there's been a historical lack of reinvestment. It's demonstrated with the net book value in the books of the system, right? So they typically lack the technical, managerial, financial ability to continue to own and operate a water utility like this. So you can tell that both from violation information from the federal EPA, net book value information, ownership evaluation shows they don't own any other utilities. It's not their primary business.
So you gathered this information and saw this in the database, and you reached out to the Bear Den owners?
That is correct, ma'am.
Right. So you approached them and expressed an interest in purchasing, or?
That is correct. We went to them and said, we believe this is not your primary business, and offered to buy them. Oftentimes the sellers we come to didn't know there was a potential to sell their company. They're running it on the side. Oftentimes they didn't want to be in the business, and we bought systems for $1 before. It just really depends on the individual seller.
So you consider this utility that you seek to acquire to be distressed?
We would say they have at the very minimum, they're technically and financially distressed in the sense that they don't really know, they haven't done reinvestment in the system that we can document. A lot of these assets are past their useful life. And then beyond that, we don't see the financial wherewithal potentially do that. So those are the two for sure, I would point out.
Did you uncover that they had any service quality issues?
We didn't see a whole lot of service quality issues. We definitely heard from residents about outages a number of times. I think the system that small, they typically have a hard time communicating with residents when they have a standard water main break or anything like that.
How did you come to hear from the residents?
When we walk around on these properties, people come up and talk about what we're doing. These are small communities. So they see you walking around.
All right, and so they had some complaints about outages.
It's hard to get information out of the existing utility would be the general theme.
All right. Did you consider that you received or somehow became aware of that customers had complaints about their service?
That was all anecdotal from being on site.
Okay. And should you acquire the Bear Den system, how do you anticipate keeping rates at a reasonable level? If you should you join this system with other larger systems that perhaps have greater service and water quality issues?
So we're adopting the existing tariffs as they are as part of this purchase. So we have no plans to raise rates upon purchasing the system.
Well, what's your vision? I understand you want to acquire a network within North Carolina and then eventually have this uniform system. So how do you envision that coming about? And by that, I think I'm assuming that most of the acquisitions will be at about this level in terms of size, number of customers. So how do you bring it together to where you expressed in your testimony economies of scales, spreading costs and those kinds of things? How do you envision that coming together?
Yes. So Bear Den's actually small from the typical transaction size we do. And Bear Den is a great example of a system that needs economy of scales. They actually need blended into a larger customer base. You know, when you have a large replacement project at Bear Den, because it's such a small number of customers, so when the hydrodynamic tank eventually fails, when you have a well casing problem, that kind of thing, you know, those are the kind of costs that we know will be better suited to be spread over a much larger customer base in the long run. And the way we look at the world is that all these utilities have the same amount of work that needs done over the next 10 years, right? It's just about timeframes. At what year is system A going to need massive replacement versus system B? And over a long enough time period with a big enough customer base and purchasing power and technical managerial financial ability, we're able to keep rates reasonable, access to financials.
Can the system, so the commission has a general philosophy that we do look for uniform systems and we see benefit in that to the customers. But with, so what we have so far in North Carolina tend to be larger systems, and so they come kind of ready-made with a larger customer base across the board. But with the system, this Redbird was getting started in North Carolina, and also a system like Bear Den is very small. So is a possibility that a system like Bear Den is too small to have the customers reap those same benefits?
No, ma'am. We've seen all over the country that it's so. We own systems smaller, 11. We've been asked to go purchase systems by either environmental regulators or economic regulators in various jurisdictions. And we typically put large bunches of systems together. I mean, we have 150 individual disparate systems in a single state market that have a single tariff pricing. So, and we really built the company to be able to manage these small remote operations. That was kind of one of our core strengths, I believe, as a firm. So we did a good job of using computerized maintenance management, remote monitoring technology. We do GIS mapping of these systems, which, you know, typically in Bear Den's case in specific, there's been little to no asset mapping over time. So when you bring all those things to bear, it actually makes it more efficient to run them as part of a larger group of systems at a state level.
So is your experience though that when you've been sought out, that the company is in a level of distress, needing or having an immediate need for repair, replacement, or some other kind of maintenance as compared to Bear Den?
Bear Den is very similar to other systems we buy all over the country. I mean, it's a developer who's not in the utility business, really hasn't reinvested for, any significant level for a long period of time. They're one bad event from having some type of, major service area and no real plan for asset management.
But they've not had a bad event to your knowledge, that kind of bad event anyway.
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge.
The conclusion of this this transfer petition, this transfer application, and if it's allowed, what exactly will Redbird operating? What will they own in terms of the utility system? Will they own the full system in all parts and all land that's necessary? Or will other entities, such as the Water Association, still own some pieces or parts?
It's our understanding from the title work we've done that we will own all the parts and pieces. That the whole, both the parcels, the lines, and the wells, the tanks will all, will either own them or have the easement rights to them.
All right, and should you find, in some regards, the way the Water Association came to your attention, do you anticipate any issues, or will you be in a position to acquire ownership of all elements of the system?
We don't see any issues. We believe we'll be able to purchase on all elements of the system.
All right. Now, your application was filed in the end of 2020. Have you had occasion to discuss the acquisition with the residents, the customers, or any of the local governmental units in the area?
We sent notification to the customers, ma'am, but we haven't had any,
Haven't had any kind of town hall meetings
no, ma'am.
to let them know who you are and get to meet you, that kind of thing?
No, ma'am. Written communication is what we use for that.
And beyond the notification, the customers don't have any other information on any expected changes or anticipated changes in their dealings with Redbird as a utility versus Bear Dunes as a utility?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Could you say the question differently?
Are the customers have any reason to expect changes or know exactly what changes will be coming as a result of the transfer?
I mean, besides the written information that we sent over, say we're planning to buy it, we're fully qualified, we're excited to own your system, that kind of thing. And then when we purchase systems, we send a huge packet out about the company, different media to different mediums to be able to communicate with us, all that.
All right, and in your testimony, you've indicated that Redbird was going to be deferring on the replacement of water meters. What can you tell us about the approximate age of the existing meters, whether they're working properly at this stage, and when you anticipate they would need to be replaced?
So it's our belief on the water meters that the majority of them are functioning. In terms of replacement schedule, I think we'll look at that as a wider replacement program across the entire state. Obviously, we'll replace every meter that fails, but I don't know what the exact date of the meter ages.
Do you know if the meters are of differing ages? Are they the same between the campground in terms of their age versus what appears to be more residential settings?
The only information I can tell you for sure on what the meter ages or the meter replacements are listed in the information that the sellers have given us. They've obviously replaced some meters as things has failed.
Would you anticipate a wholesale replacement at some point where all the meters would be replaced and be new meters?
We typically do not do that. It's a rolling replacement schedule, just part of your annual investment program.
And at this point, you have no time frame in mind, just as needed replacement.
Probably, typically we come in with maybe a 5-year, replacement program. I've done 5 years, 10 years. It really depends on the situation. I mean, there are situations where we have done wholesale replacement, but those have been unique situations.
So initially, you thought, the company thought that replacement might be necessary, and then through due diligence discovered otherwise. Is that correct?
Part of it has to do with water loss. There was a lot of water loss in the system. And, this, over the last couple of years, the existing owner has done spot repairs. He's kind of let the water loss. He's not done any line replacement or very little of that, but he has done spot repairs. So allowed us to see pumping rates versus sales rates. And it was much better.
All right. In your supplemental testimony, Mr. Cox, you indicate that Redbird agrees not to pursue an acquisition adjustment in the 2 dockets. And, but in the stipulation filed, the language used there is the company agrees not to pursue an acquisition adjustment related to the Bear Den system in this or any future proceeding. Is there meaning behind the differing language
Not that I'm aware of,
in the
ma'am.
2 dockets? So you don't plan to seek an acquisition adjustment in any future proceeding?
That is correct. I'm Bear Den. We're not
Right.
plan on seeking any acquisition adjustment.
All right. Are there questions from Commissioner Hughes?
If you could just clarify that. Are you taking an acquisition adjustment off the table for anything that you're involved in North Carolina, or just for Bear Den?
Just for Bear Den.
Okay. Okay, for now.
Mr. Cox, I did forget to ask, so we saw indication that you do plan a rate increase in approximately 14 months.
Believe that we would file an application depending on how much work we have done across the state. I mean,
What makes you know or think it'll be in 14 months?
that's typically how long it takes we do investment. The way we look at systems across the country is we do investment kind of in 2 waves. We do our first initial investment, what I would call triage investment. So there's failing electrical components, failing mechanical components. You've got, lack of security and locks, fences. I mean, just the basic, the systems needs to not be a health safety hazard, needs to, be operational. So that's kind of phase 1. And then what we've seen is you have to own the systems for a number of months before you can really understand how they work. They all have nuances. They're, got different demand usages and the zones, and they're not designed even according to what we originally think. So there's some time to understand what's really happening in the system. And then from there, if there's major construction projects, and major being depending on the size of the system, that typically takes engineering work and construction permitting, all of that. It's typically 14 months before we have both those waves of investment done. I would say that schedule may be elongated here in North Carolina just because of how long it takes to acquire systems. So we want to have a good number of systems acquired and through that process. So it's pretty fluid right there.
All right. Commissioner Hughes?
Just related to that investment schedule and potential for future increases, have you looked into how the current rates for Bear Den, I know rates can be regional, how they fit into the local governments and the other utilities in this general region in the state?
I have not.
Would you be surprised to know that it's a little bit on the low side? I think the rates from what I can tell. with the level of investment that you're going to make, do you have projections out whether it's going to be substantial increases? Just, I'll use that in quotation marks, but compared to the rates now, or is it going to be modest?
Yeah, there really is, there's a lot of variables in that. So it's a function of how many systems we purchase, how bad are the systems when we actually start operating them. So, I've had initial rate increases, 25%, and then had much higher depending on how the level of reinvestment that's required. So that, that's a pretty, especially in terms of how many systems we buy, also matters as well. So.
I mean, it sounds like you've been at this in some other states. Again, just without holding you to numbers, is that in the range in other states where you've seen that 25 to much higher?
Well, yeah, we've seen higher, but also from low bases. We bought systems. I mean, I bought systems in one state market that had no rates associated with a certificated area before. And, I bought systems that had $5 rates for 40 years that were, completely dilapidated. So it really just depends on what the existing rates are. It doesn't shock me that systems rates are low. They've had a rate increase since 1995. So that makes sense to me.
It does. I guess I'm just concerned that everyone's walking in with their eyes open, and this term rate shock, could occur. Maybe it's inevitable in this community and some of your other communities. So just wanted to make sure that was on the table. And another question that not related to, well, indirectly related to the cost. These systems, distressed, kind of orphan, are getting a lot of attention, as I'm sure you know. EPA, state departments of environmental quality, they're concerned, and I think you've voiced that. And the solution that many offer are similar to what you're providing. The thing that we hear a lot is the use of public funds to do an influx to kind of do, to your term, triage or initial bringing up to scale. This state in particular has some very large funds that have been allocated to help these types of systems. And I just, could you explain a little bit your research and how you've worked and interfaced with that kind of public money in other places, and what you've done in North Carolina as far as checking out eligibility and things like that?
Yes, so we have utilized those funds where they've either become available. So a recent example is there was COVID relief money that certain states allocated that investor-owns were also eligible for. So we applied for those funds in other state markets where we were able to. We have used some states have public WIFIA type money that's available to investor-owns, and so we're working with those those agencies as well. Also, it's cost benefit. We've been offered bonding in certain states, but our cost of capital is cheaper than the bond rate is all in, so it doesn't make sense even though it's a public bond. And then in North Carolina specific, we have done some research, but I apologize, I don't remember what the research is here in North Carolina in terms of availability. I can't remember state revolving fund loans are available to investor-owns. I just don't remember off the top of my head.
They are on the drinking water side, but certainly it's something to navigate. But just thank you for kind of giving your experience. No further questions.
Mr. Cox, before I pass you off to Chair Mitchell, something that I've been confused about the entire time is in the beginning with the system, there was the Bear Den Acres and there was the campground piece, and they formed one utility. But can you describe the kind of customers served by, what I'm assuming is a residential piece separate and apart from the campground? Are those just cabins of an area? Are they typical single family homes? Could you just give me some description and idea?
Ma'am, I don't understand the campground piece of this. I think there's 50 or 55 single-family homes. They're the majority of the customers inside this system.
All right, and are they associated with the campground in any way other than they initially had the same owner or develop?
Ma'am, I know that the owner of the entire development was an initial family who then created development entities and sold it and all of that.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Chair Mitchell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cox. Just a few questions for you. Some will follow up on questions from Commissioner Brown Bland. Just help me get oriented a little bit to some evidence that's either in the record or not in the record. Is there anywhere in the record a list of assets identified, specific assets that will be acquired by the LLC?
I apologize, ma'am. I don't know if the assets were in the contract. I know we do the title work on the assets, but I believe it may be a list of assets that we get from the owner, correct?
Typically in an asset purchase agreement, you'd have a list of assets identified. That is not included in the copy of the asset purchase agreement I have in my file. So to the extent that there is such a list, Commissioner Brown Bland, with your permission, I'd like that to be a late filed exhibit.
That is fine, and I don't know that it's not in the missing pages, but we do want to acquire the list.
Fair enough. I believe, going from memory, I think it's Exhibit B, but I may be subject to correction on
Okay,
that.
and your memory's pretty good, Mr. Higgins. I think that let me flip to I think that Exhibit B is a description of land improvements, easements, rights of way, permits, and leases. And then C would be what I would think of as
Okay.
the
I was close, but
physical
yeah.
assets, yeah.
yeah.
But none of those is attached.
All right. I apologize. I don't understand why you don't have that,
Okay.
but you'll certainly have it shortly.
If you could, and it could be a problem on our end, but if you could ensure that into this, if okay with you, ensure that into the record gets the asset list, which would be Exhibit C, and Exhibit B to the extent that you all have identified the land and improvements thereon.
I don't know that we have a real estate document yet that has all of that. I'll certainly, to the extent it exists, it will be there. I have the real estate counsel here to answer any questions. So
Okay.
but yes, we'll get you C and D, B and C.
Okay. Is the company confident, Mr. Cox, that at this point it has identified all of the assets that must be acquired, as well as any real estate interests that must be acquired in order to operate the utility safely and reliably?
We do believe that we have identified everything that needs to be to order to own all the assets to provide service. Yes.
And so, again, just for your counsel's benefit, want to make sure that that documentation is in the record. Mr. Cox, there is an assignment of contract rights that's included in the copy of the asset purchase agreement that was provided to that's on file in this docket, and it's undated. I believe, Commissioner Brown Bland asked for a dated copy of that agreement. But as far as I can tell, it likely predates an amendment to the agreement for sale of utility system that was entered into on November 25th, 2020. And that amendment, there is a dated, executed version of that amendment included in the documentation that's been provided to the commission. My concern is here, the assignment predates and assigns the rights of Central States Water Resources, Inc. to the OPCO, to Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC. And then the amendment entered into doesn't mention anything about Redbird. It just identifies Central States Water Resources, Inc. So I just want to make sure that, that any and all contractual rights and obligations are have been appropriately assigned and accounted for. That's really just, again, Mr. Higgins' question for you. But Mr. Cox, to your knowledge, any amendment to the contract would be done with the assent and understanding of the Redbird Utility Operating Company?
Yes, that is correct.
And to be clear, when I say contract, I'm referring to the agreement for sale of utility system. Okay. In the documentation that's on file with the commission, it's my understanding that the company provided notice to customers at the direction of the commission. You all provided notice to customers by hard copy at service addresses, and then later provided hard copy to customers at their billing addresses. Do I understand that correctly?
Ma'am, that may be true. I just don't know the exact detail of that. I apologize.
Okay.
I can go look back at it, but that sounds correct to me.
Okay. Did you all notice an uptick? Let me ask this question first. Have you all developed and made live a website for the North Carolina Operating Company at this point?
Yes, I believe we have that website up.
And do website analytics indicate an uptick in visits to that website subsequent to the mailing of the notices?
I actually get those metrics on a monthly basis, and there was not a significant uptick. You know, there was some uptick, obviously, but I can't remember what the number is, but I get that.
Okay. Are you aware that the commission received I believe it's 4 letters from customers of this utility regarding the proposed transfer?
I am.
Okay. And have you reviewed those letters?
Yes, and the most recent one I'm more familiar with because it's the one I most recently read about the Water Association, all of that.
Okay. And has the company received any additional communications aside from these 3 or 4? Has the company received additional communications from customers of the system?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Bear with me 1 minute. I'm looking at one of the exhibits to the application that identifies it's a 5-year projected ops revenue. I know where that is. Bear with me. It's attachment F to the application. It's confidential document, so I'm not going to go into the numbers, but it seems to be that the title is operating budget, and there are some, there are various years identified here. There's year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and year 5. Help me understand this operating budget and the assumptions there. Is that just is it for the utility system that that Redbird Utility Operating Company currently owns, and this one proposal, or what are the assumptions there with those numbers?
For sure, I don't have that exhibit in front of me. If I could get it in front of me, I could probably answer those questions more intelligently.
Okay.
Chair Mitchell, I'm chagrined to tell you that I walked out of my office without the notebook with the
I
application.
believe Ms. Yost has it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yost. All right, just walk me through. Don't identify any of the numbers. I don't want to get into any confidential information, but what are these numbers?
Yeah, these are projections on a statewide basis for operating and capital budget numbers.
Assuming how many systems in operation?
It's yeah, assuming about 8,000 connections. You can see there at the top. There's a customer count that's per residential equivalent.
Okay, and so this system provides how many connections?
Like 50, 55.
That's just the single family residences, and then
That's correct.
you've got the additional campground connections.
Which I don't know what the campground connections are in terms of what the, what the rate is over there.
Okay.
So,
And the system that has been, for which the CPCN has been issued for the to Redbird, how many connections there?
the one over on the Outer Banks,
Yes.
forgive me, a couple hundred, I believe.
Okay.
Maybe something in that neighborhood.
Okay, so these numbers assume the acquisition or the acquisition of a number of utility franchises.
Yeah, I believe we have 12 pending currently.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And just following up there, the 12 systems, assuming all CPCN application or transfer applications were granted, would you get to around 7,500 connections?
Well, Craig, actually, that number is going to continue to grow as we sign more contracts in the state. And we're actively, pursuing other sellers as well.
Understood. I'm just trying to understand how many systems are represented by 7,500?
It's the 12 existing
Okay.
transactions that are in front of you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe it's 12, that's subject to correction.
Okay. In your testimony to this commission, it was your direct testimony filed on February 11th. On page 5, lines 10 through 12, you testify as follows. As is the case with the Baird system, many of the systems which Redbird seeks to acquire here are distressed or troubled. Now, you've already talked through this question or the use of the term distressed or troubled. So is there, help me understand why the company seeks to acquire distressed or troubled systems?
Because we built a kind of an expertise on buying these small systems. I mean, they typically are orphaned, and the commissioner brought that up before. You don't see major consolidation with these orphan systems because it takes a different skill set to really work on those. I mean, small water and wastewater is a radically different animal than big water and wastewater. The systems lack redundancy, lack existing utility maps. Operational know-how is way different. Be able to do it remotely, cost effectively is a different skill set that oftentimes the larger utilities have.
Okay. And so when you use the words distressed or troubled, help me understand what a distressed system is and what a troubled system is.
Yeah, I mean, distress, you could use the formal EPA designation of Clean Water Drinking Water Act violations, Clean Water Act. Troubled can be, a lack of commission filings. It could be a lack of long-term investment. It could be owners who are not professional utility, who are not utility professionals. I mean, it's a pretty large umbrella there.
So help me understand the company's expertise in owning and operating distressed and troubled systems. Just walk me through what that expertise is and how the company has acquired it.
Yeah, so, my staff and myself have been small water and wastewater kind of my entire career, from design build, operate. And small being, typically we say small is below 8,000 residential connections in a single system, right? Is kind of the definition we use for small. And really, we currently own 440 of these, water and wastewater systems across the country. I believe we're the second, either the first or second largest single wastewater plant owner in the country. And, water systems, some similar count. So we've really done this on a repetitive basis. So, we've got a toolkit of solutions. I'd like to say we've seen it all in terms of, configurations, previous ownership. I mean, it's, but I think that experience combined with really built the company to be remotely operated, right? So, and did that by, from the day one of founding this company, we built the whole company on the cloud. We've utilized GIS technology, computerized maintenance management systems, so that you can take an operator with a handheld and be able to go out and work on preventative work orders. Actual work orders are called in, maintenance schedules, all of that, and keep digital records for asset management and for customer interaction all the way down to the property level.
Okay. So this makes sense. Remote operations where those can be accomplished, understood. But what will you do in terms of how will you have boots on the ground in North Carolina? Because there will be times when you need to have a person or people available to go to McDowell County and to go to Currituck County or Carteret County. So how are you going to manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do contract operations and maintenance firms. So we use, that's a standard industry practice. And really we require an hour from a emergency call-in to boots on the ground, right? And back to our emergency operations plan. So if you're a customer of Redbird and you call in and there's you smell sewer, let's use that, or your water pressure is going down, right? You call in and that triggers a work order process. That work order gets kicked out. Our operations and maintenance personnel have to answer that work order, return the call in 15 minutes, right? So that 15 minutes is not accomplished, then the work order escalates all the way to me eventually, up to the company to make sure that it gets addressed. When you have an event that is deemed an emergency event, which would be a water pressure event, for example, let's use water pressure, then that automatically triggers rolling a truck out, right? So they have an hour to be on site, and we've got a GPS tag attached with the handheld so we can track that the person has left and gotten on site. So we go and assess the situation. If it's something that can't be done at that point, your personnel in the truck, you need a piece of yellow iron, that triggers a whole nother work order process. The customer's informed. In that scenario, it's a water pressure event, probably would trigger a precautionary boil water notice, which we handled, both, written, email blast, all of that kind of stuff. And then we really track cradle to grave. It took us this long to get a piece of yellow iron out there. We resolve the issue, before and after pictures, and then we have that all tied to the address of the original customer who called in. That's how we manage that.
Okay. Who have you identified your contract maintenance operations companies that you'll partner with here, that you'll go that you will work with here in North Carolina?
Yeah, we already have some in place in terms of Outer Banks operations.
And what about for McDowell County?
We have them identified for the entire state.
Oh, you have. Can you let me know who they are?
I'm sorry, I don't know the names of the companies. I can think of one, Clearwater, that I know for sure is one of our providers here.
All right. If I may, Commissioner Brown-Bland, would you provide a list of those operators as a late filed exhibit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What confidence should a customer sitting in North Carolina have, who's served by one of your systems that needs water to conduct daily activities, that if there's a problem and water service is impacted and that person makes a phone call, that it's going to be responded to and addressed as quickly as possible?
I mean, 100% confidence. We really pride ourselves on that. I mean, that's one of the things. We have not had a sustained customer complaint that I can think of across the entire country. We have worked very hard to be able to track everything. It's one thing to say you can do it, but it's another to actually measure it. So I think everyone that calls in, and I'm a father of 4 children. My water pressure goes out. My little kids are going crazy. I'm an unhappy camper, right? So I'm calling my water company. I'm pretty mad, right? And things get crossways in terms of how I remember the situation. I felt like I called 5 times. You guys took 2 hours. Well, we track every single phone call. We record the phone calls that come in to make sure that our customer service representatives are being respectful, responsive, understand. And really that cradle to grave approach gives customers 100% guarantee that we're going to be able to provide safe and reliable service on a long-term basis.
Okay. The communications with customers are really important, especially, smaller systems, neighborhood systems that are, systems that serve neighborhoods that are closely knit neighborhoods or, linked together on Nextdoor or some of these other website programs that allow communications, relatively easily among neighbors. How is the company proposing here to make sure it reaches all of its customers, stays in close contact with them, and is able to reach them when there is a problem or, there is some other type of information that needs to be disseminated?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're very big on providing multiple mediums of communication. It's funny you bring up Nextdoor. We've utilized Nextdoor. So as a service provider inside a geo-fenced location, we can actually send messages to Nextdoor, and have done that in communities that have a setup like that. But we realize we're talking to a range of customers, right? You've got customers who are only going to receive information written. They're not going to receive it. We know their customers use social media for everything. Some people go to the website. We try to open all those avenues of communication to go back and forth real time. And on the ground, for a water event or something like that, you also have posted signs, all of those things. So we're trying to utilize every single pathway we can. I think it's one of the benefits for bringing a company like us to a situation like Bear Den that doesn't have multiple means of communication. That's really where we, really show the difference between being owned by a professional utility.
So what I'm hearing you say is that customers and Bear Den, assuming the transfer application is approved, once you all are owners and operators of that system, communications between the customers and their utility are going to improve.
They're going to improve substantially, and I can say with confidence in Bear Den.
Quality of service, will it improve as well?
It will improve, especially with remote operations and remote monitoring. We set up remote monitoring units. So, we're typically ahead of the curve when an event happens because we're seeing it happen on remote monitoring before you call in.
All right. All right, Commissioner Brown, I have nothing further.
Commissioner Hughes?
I'm just curious, but it will impact your last statement about the quality of service. The use of SCADA and the use of remote control, as far as I could tell, one time there was hopes that things really could be completely remote and that you could be actually control equipment. I think in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a pushback because of some of the cyber issues. Have you had to kind of reassess your operating strategy at all because of that? And is it still going to work?
Yeah, that's true. So we actually don't use remote operations in the sense we're not turning valves from a distance. We're not doing equipment. And we're very big on cybersecurity. It's something we get warned about quite a bit. It's a huge issue in the National Association of Water Companies in terms of, a real and present threat. I'm continually getting Homeland Security messages today, about the threat that poses. We're very big on internal security, dual authentication, all of that. So we've not had a cybersecurity issue yet, but we are concerned about it. Our remote monitoring is more to dispatch people than it is to remotely operate it, right? And I would say, one of the things that goes along with that, one of the things we're experiencing, the water industry is experiencing, it's kind of silver tsunami. We have the retirement of the trades that are coming out of the business, right? So one of the things that we're really dealing with is trying to make our operations foolproof, right? That, that a person with the right certifications and the right handheld knows how to run it. It's not overly complicated, because that's one of the things we've seen that really helps with continuity of service.
All right, Mr. Cox, so is the company able to augment its application with any reports that show its response time to customer calls and repair times to customer calls? Is that a report that comes out of your system that you?
Yeah, I'd be glad to give you a couple of recent events that we have that could show you response times and all that.
Well, and
Question, I'm sorry, are you asking future?
Well, I was asking for historical information that might support his testimony that his response time is quick, his repair time is quick. And then I was going to ask, on a going forward basis, is that something that, with regard to this system, should you acquire it, would you be able to provide? Is that a part of your communications and database systems, that you would be able to print out a report that would show the response times and the repair times?
We'd be happy to create a report if it's helpful. And we've done that in jurisdictions, especially on the customer service side, call wait times, drop times, all those kind of reports. We have those.
All right. And that's going forward. And do you have historical, some that you could provide?
Yes, I could give you the last couple months of customer service data.
All right, we'll take you up on that, Mr. Higgins. And ask that be filed with the commission. Now, Chair Mitchell reminded me, I had written it down here in your testimony, when you talk about the benefits to the customers, there's a large emphasis here on social media, being able to use the cloud tool, and being different sort of high-tech ways of communicating with customers, or they may not seem high-tech to the majority anymore. But in North Carolina, are you familiar enough with the area to know that actually would provide a benefit to these 55 customers and whoever's in the campground?
I would say what we see kind of across the board, even these small communities, it's a mix. It's a continuum of some people that's going to be a real benefit, and other people it's going to be very traditional means of communication. I mean, there's some rural communities in particular where you've got to have a sign at the front of the community. Hey, we have precautionary boil order because we're doing water main maintenance, right? In addition to door hangers, those are all the avenues. So I agree with you. In communities across the U.S., I would say, there's a certain percentage, depending on the community, that all the social media channels don't mean anything. And then there's certain communities that's the only way they receive any information. Yeah.
What about this community? Do you know if there's adequate cell and Wi-Fi service in the area?
I don't know the answer on that, on this community in particular.
All right, and so what are the main benefits to these customers if you were to take out that kind of, the social media, the email, the text kind of things? Are there still, what benefits are left?
It's still the same. I mean, you call in as a customer because we're still providing safe and reliable service to the individual home and resident, right? So there's no difference if you get your information via snail mail or Facebook. When you call in, you get our people, you get the response times, you get the follow-up from it to close out any issues that have happened. You get the advantage of a company that is doing reinvestment over a long time period, so that you're going to have safe and reliable service in the future. I mean, I'd say all the benefits are the same. The only difference is you're not communicating with us in those extra mediums.
All right, so one of my concerns, and I just put it out here, is that you got 55 of the single-family homes. We don't quite know how much we'll be serving with the campground. But aside from your testimony here today, we don't have a record that the customers are unhappy with their current service. I can ask the public staff about it, but the commission's not aware of complaints. I'm just concerned, or I'm looking for the answer to how we can explain to those 55 customers that they truly are benefiting from this change, particularly if they're anticipating a rate increase, which is something that the 4 customers have raised in there.
Yeah, my answer to that would be, one, it's oftentimes difficult for residents to understand water and wastewater infrastructure, right? I mean, how many customers, unless they live right next to a piece of physical infrastructure, can identify where the water is coming from, where the meter is oftentimes, where the lines are, right? It's you flush your toilet or you run your shower, and that's kind of your only measure of that, right? For What we know to be true, though, is that, systems like this, and think the system's, decades old without any major replacement program. What we know we bring to the table is, one, the continuity of service, because we're able to respond and bring resources to bear, but a reinvestment plan so that this community continues to receive safe, reliable service for the decades to come. Because of the current trajectory, major failure will happen. We can say whatever that time period is, right? But what we say all the time in the small water and wastewater business is the infrastructure crisis is not looming, it's already here for these small communities, right? And so because this community is not experienced, thank God, some service failure at the current rate of reinvestment, it will happen, right? So that is one of the biggest reasons why we're in this business. I mean, that's what would be my response.
Is the infrastructure crisis here at Verde and Acres today?
I would say just from the financial records alone, you can tell the lack of reinvestment over the last number of decades.
All right. Mr. Higgins and Ms. Yost, earlier I indicated to you I had a question that comes out of attachment L to the application, which is marked as confidential. If that attachment is truly confidential and I should not ask questions in public, I'm prepared to close the hearing room to the public.
Yeah,
I'm pretty comfortable, that unless there's some specific technology thing in here that I'm worried about, that I'm okay with. We pioneered some technologies and some systems. I read this earlier. So if I feel like the question's confidential, is it okay if I say, hey, I believe this to be confidential? But I think in the majority, I think I'll be fine.
Sure. I just didn't even want to reveal anything in the question that you might think is that. All right, we'll forge ahead and you let me know. It's fairly simple and we've already touched upon it. What we saw in that engineering memorandum, which is page 4 and 5 of attachment L, in there we saw indication that there were leaks and pipe breaks and that kind of thing, but it's especially leaking water meters. And yet we're hearing there's a decision to defer on replacement of the water meters. So are the meters functioning accurately, especially for billing purposes? And why, in the face of knowing that they're leaky meters, has Redbird made the decision they would defer replacement of the water meters?
Some of the repairs were made by the existing owner. His water loss percentage was so high, he was under pressure. There are certain thresholds for water loss at which the state kind of looks in. I think it's 30%.
So the current owner already replaced meters, not just pipeline and lines, but meters as
Yeah,
well.
I think repairs the meters, and spot repairs at lines, there was kind of dual pressure from us as well. So that's what gave us the confidence we're not losing a bunch of water and thus in danger of risking service to the customers.
And I asked you earlier about your time frame, and you explained how you would make a decision about when it was the time to replace and how you'd go about that. But just to close that loop, does Redbird intend to replace meters closer to the end of the 1 to 5 year time frame that's recommended by the engineer?
I don't know the answer to that question. I would say we'll fit them into a larger meter replacement program kind of across the state, right? Obviously, anything that fails, we'll replace. Anything that's providing bad service or, and I'm sure everyone's aware, older meters actually underbill, they don't overbill customers, right? So, we have an incentive to replace that as needed, process, but we're not going to carte blanche just do it.
Right. And Mr. Higgins, before I turn it over to you for questions on commission's questions, you had a number of requests for some additional information or late filed exhibits, and I would just add to that in a general sense, as the situation progresses and there's a change in status of what's available, if you'll keep kind of a rolling update of what we have here.
yes, ma'am.
All right. All right, Mr. Higgins, do you have questions, or Ms. Yost for that matter? Ms. Yost, do you have questions on commission's questions? Mr. Higgins?
I don't have any. Questions?
All right. Well, Mr. Cox, you may be excused. What, Mr. Higgins? Let me
Yeah.
receive.
Yes, ma'am. I have while it's unusual for the commission to have live testimony, I have Mr. Raymer present, who is.
Well,
Redbird's-
first, wait, I was referring to your
sorry.
exhibits.
Yes, I'd like to move the exhibits of the documents that have been marked as Redbird Cox exhibits 2 and 3.
All right. Without objection, Redbird Cox exhibits 2 and 3 will be received into evidence at this time, as well as Cox exhibit 1.
See that? It's got me.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Ms. Higgins?
Yes, ma'am. I have available, because of the question about the ownership of the water lines that was alluded to in the commission's recent order, Mr. Raymer spent some time this weekend going through the Register of Deeds office files in McDowell County. And I have a deed that is a copy of a recorded deed, by which I've come to learn that in 2016, the Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. was conveyed to an entity called Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc. And this is the deed by which the Moody family conveyed its ownership of the land and the utility entity without commission approval. But there is language in this deed that reflects the conveyance of all the water utility system assets. And so Mr. Raymer is here for the purpose of authenticating the deed if the commission requires that. Otherwise, I would tender this as an exhibit on behalf of Redbird. And we're at the commission's pleasure in terms of whether you want Mr. Raymer to authenticate it.
Well, since Mr. Raymer is here, let's get him on the stand.
All right.
Is it,
Thank you.
do you have a copy of that for us, Mr. Higgins? And has Ms. Yost seen it? If you got any extras, you get one to our staff back then.
Mr. Raymer, please state your name for the record.
Hold on, Mr. Raymer. Would you place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right? Do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony you will give today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
I did.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Raymer, please state your name for the record.
My name is Jonathan Raymer,
And what's your business address?
3623 North Elm Street, Greensboro, North Carolina.
How are you employed?
I'm an attorney with
Uh,
law firm Carolinas.
All right. And how long have you been licensed to practice law in North Carolina?
Approximately 12 and a half, 13 years.
What is the focus of your practice?
Real estate.
Were you retained by Central States Water Resources to search title for real estate and easements to be acquired by Redbird Water in connection with the acquisition of the Bear Den water utility system?
I was.
And did you become aware on the end of last week of the issue raised regarding restrictive covenants purporting to create the Bear Den Water Association and to convey water lines?
I was.
And did you undertake further research at the Bear Den regarding Bear Den at the McDowell County Register of Deeds?
I did.
And did you locate a deed that has a bearing on the question of the ownership of those assets?
I did. We located a deed filed in 2016.
And what's the date of the deed, please?
It is, the recording date is what we go by usually for title. It is December the 22nd of 2016.
All right. Commissioner Brown Bland, I would ask that the deed which I've handed out, which was recorded in book 1200, page 1006, be marked as Redbird Raymer Exhibit 1.
Is there any, well, there's no, yes, it will be so identified. Raymer, Redbird Raymer, Exhibit 1.
And who were the parties to that deed?
Parties to the deed, the grantor or entity or individuals were the heirs and or individuals in ownership, the Moody family who were in charge of the development.
And were the Moody family, based on your research and title, were they involved in the original development of the Bear Den project?
They were. The Moody family originally received title, and I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but 1971, as in their individual names, Mr. Moody and his wife.
And if you turn to page 10 of this document, which is the last page, is there a provision on this page that deals with the transfer of the ownership of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. and ownership of the water utility system?
There is.
And would you read that into the record, please, sir?
Certainly. It is acknowledged that grantee is purchasing all stock of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc., which owns and operates all water utility equipment, including without the limitation, the water tank situated in northeast terminus to Bear Cub Drive as shown on the plat recorded McDowell Plat Book 26 at pages 98 and 99, and all roads, as well as roadway and utility easements that serve Bear Den Acres Phase 1 and 2 and the Mountain View cabins.
Are you aware of any other recorded documents which address the ownership subsequent to the 2016 recordation of this deed that addressed the ownership of these water system assets?
I am not.
I don't have any other questions for Mr. Raymer.
Any questions from the public staff? No question. Chair Mitchell.
Good afternoon. I guess a few questions. Primarily, why did, I'm looking at the at the agreement for sale of utility system. And the parties to that agreement are Central States Water Resources, Inc. and Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. And signatory on behalf of Bear Den is Mark Kraus,
Correct.
identified as the president. Is Mark Mr. Kraus was he unaware of this transfer? Why would he enter into this agreement in 2020 when this transfer of interest took place in 2016?
Mr. Kraus owns, at least is the owner of both of the entities of Bear Den. I did look on the North Carolina Secretary of State site to see if they had dissolved as pursuant to this document, Bear Den Acres Development. It is currently existing. Mr. Kraus is the existing owner and manager, or I guess president of the Mountain Resort, as well as Bear Den Acres Development.
So are you aware of any agreement whereby Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc. would have transferred to Bear Den Acres Development, Inc., the assets that are the subject of this CBCN transfer application?
Most all of my purview is basically limited to the Register of Deeds recordings. There are no other deeds which convey any other interest or assets of Bear Den.
Okay. And the paragraph that council had you read into the record, it is acknowledged that grantee is purchasing all of the stock.
Correct.
Have you reviewed any agreement associated with the purchase and sale of that stock by Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc., of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc.?
Other than what's purported by deed, I have no other documentation.
Okay. And so what I'm here, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. has not been dissolved. It's still
Existing entity.
an entity, go ahead, answer the question. It has not been dissolved?
It has not been dissolved.
Okay. And is it in good standing with the state of North Carolina?
According to the currently on the website for the Secretary of State, it does show as active. We have not pulled any kind of certificate of good standing
Okay.
for either entity, so I don't have further information on that.
And you personally haven't had any discussions with this Mr. Kraus about why he would have why Bear Den Acres Development would have entered into this agreement?
I have not. We do find, and stop me if I'm going over, we do find that a lot of times when people enter purchase agreements, that they do it under the wrong entity or they do it incorrectly. As we do title investigations, we further clarify who the owner actually should be. And a lot of times those purchase agreements are amended later in time. We find all the time where sellers will enter into something that's not just you, it's also your brother as an owner, or with companies, the wrong entity is being represented. So as part of our title work, sometimes we take corrective measures as to purchase agreements.
It is, thank you for that explanation. It is or that information. It is experience around here that from time to time with smaller systems or even with larger systems, there can be inaccuracies in chain of title or other sort of problems with real estate or with titled assets that are not caught or not remedied. And so it's hence the reason for our questions, and we want to get this right. Can you, is your firm doing the title work on the assets involved in this transfer?
Not the assets, but as well, and I don't know the definition of assets, but the fee simple real estate which is being conveyed. We are, of course, doing that. Everything that is subject to title insurance, which are the fee simple assets and also the easement assets. As far as water lines and everything else, that isn't typically insured through title insurance and is usually not necessarily a part of a deed, which would convey title.
Understood. So you're only going to issue the opinion for title company, is that
Correct.
okay? Assuming we get there. Okay. Okay, nothing further.
Mr. Raymond, in your dealings with this matter and your research, did you discover that the development company, Bearden Acres Development, had taken title to any of the property at issue? Are there deeds in the development company's name?
There are some. Stop me if I get into too much detail, but as you see with a lot of these developments, obviously sometimes the cart was put in front of the horse as far as development items. We did, of course, note that a lot of the restrictions which were recorded before the development company actually gained title to said property, which makes some of the restrictive covenants invalid on certain items. But there are deeds. There was a deed into phase one of the community. Restrictions were placed on afterwards. Phase two was owned solely by the individuals. The Moody's was never put under Bearden. So there's a little bit of confusion as to title that we've had to clarify.
And as part of this transaction where this deed is recorded, are you aware or ever see that there were, any cross assignments or changing of the deed, the owner?
Not
Outstanding.
usually. It was either with the Moody's or with the development company for from the 70s forward up until this deed in 2016, which conveys it to the Bearden Mountain Resort.
So separate and apart from what I see here, the grantors are the Moody's and a Miss Hong, and but you aren't aware that Bearden Acres Development ever executed anything as grantor towards the mountain resort?
No, ma'am. Only thing that we have is the exhibit, the legal description, which we presently read, which says that they were conveying it and all assets of the development, which would necessarily do that as well.
Right. Following up on a comment that Chair Mitchell made, so one of the issues that I've seen during my time at the commission is there'll be a little piece of the property or the system left over somewhere that's under another owner's land or something, and we just want to be able to avoid that. So as a part of this, as I said earlier, Mr. Higgins, as we continue to update the filings here. If you come across anything, by all means, make the commission aware. And let's see if we can make this as clean as possible up front. All right. Are there questions? Commissioner Hughes, you have any questions? Any questions on commission's questions?
And from the public staff.
None.
All right. Mr. Higgins, with regard to your
I'd
exhibit.
move the admission of Redbird Raymer Exhibit 1 into evidence, please, ma'am.
All right, that'll be received into evidence without objection. And Mr. Raymer, you may be excused, and thank you for coming and help us sort this out.
Thank you.
At this time, commission's going to take a break until 3:05. Go back to the record. All right. The record will reflect that Mr. Cox has returned to the witness stand at the commission's request. And commission has some additional questions for Mr. Cox, and we will start with that. Chair Mitchell.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Cox. Just a few questions for you. Just again, an effort to get clear on a couple of issues that are confused in the record. All right, so back to the purchase agreement, which is attachment G, the agreement for sale of utility system. The parties to that agreement are Central States Water Resources, Inc. and Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. Now I have a few questions for you about the parties to that agreement. First, in your previous testimony, I thought I understood you to say that Central States Water Resources, Inc. is a management company. Is that right?
That's correct. It's the management entity inside CSWR LLC.
Okay, and explain to me what the duties of what's the role of that company?
You know, it's where the board sits. It's where I hold, D&O insurance, all that kind of stuff. That's it. It doesn't have any financial transactions at all. So that's why we use it. We enter a new state. We transfer contracts out of it.
Okay, so it's your business model to enter into purchase agreements through the Central States Water Resources, Inc.
That is correct. When we don't have a presence in the state previously.
Okay. And then is it typical that then you assign rights under that type of contract to the entity that is a domestic corporation or a domestic entity?
That is correct.
Okay. So for example, in this case, you assigned Central States Water Resources, Inc. assigned to Redbird Utility Operating Company.
Correct.
Okay. And I see in the attachments to the application that you all have also provided articles of organization for CSWR hyphen North Carolina, LLC. And then a name change for that company to Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC. But I don't see documentation regarding the Redbird Utility Operating Company entity. Is the Redbird Utility Operating Company entity, is that also a North Carolina LLC?
It is.
Okay. In good standing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Also attached to the agreement for sale is an operating agreement of CSWR hyphen North Carolina, LLC, which we now know is the Redbird Utility Holding Company. What is so help me understand the purpose of that agreement. Why does that agreement exist?
Agreement, or is that what you're asking me? What,
Yes.
What agreement?
The operating agreement of CSWR hyphen North Carolina, LLC. It is attachment I to the application.
All right. So what's the operating? What does the operating company do? Is that what you're asking?
What's the purpose of this agreement? Why did you all, and why did the two CSWR entities enter into this agreement?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm not following you. You're saying agreement, so why agreement with who? I'm not a lawyer, so I think I'm losing your terminology there.
Okay. It's an attachment to the application that was filed in this docket. and it's titled The Operating Agreement of CSWR-North Carolina LLC.
Now I understand. Thank you.
And it's between CSWR, comma, LLC, which is a Missouri LLC. Actually, I don't even believe there are multiple parties to the agreement.
It's just laying out the fact that that eventual Redbird utility holding company is wholly owned by CSWR LLC.
Okay. Okay. The org chart that's was filed as attachment K, we've talked about it some already, shows North Carolina CSWR, comma, LLC. Was that a separate entity from the entity that you all identified as CSWR North Carolina, comma, LLC?
No, ma'am. It's the same. That's the name that's the entity that eventually got the name change.
Okay. So, so looking at this org chart, do you have the org chart in front of you,
I do not.
Mr. Higgins?
Again,
Ms. Yost? Thank you. Right, I'm just. Yeah. All right, so help me here then. Are you looking at, look at attachment, do you see a document that says attachment K at the top?
I do.
Central States Water Resource Corporate Entity Organizational Chart.
I do.
Okay, so at the top, we've got CSWR, comma, LLC, Missouri, that's a Missouri Limited Liability Company, correct?
That is CSWR LLC. Is that what you asked?
Yes.
And I
Subject to check.
subject check.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we see, I see a horizontal line to Central States Water Resources, comma, Inc. You see
Correct.
that? And we've already talked about that entity. It's what you're referring to as the management company.
Correct.
All right, now then going down the org chart, if you go to look to the far right, you see North Carolina CSWR, comma, LLC.
I see that.
Okay, and then going down that North Carolina arm, then you go down to Redbird UHC, comma, LLC, which is Redbird, as I understand it, Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC.
I see that.
And then you go down to the bottom of that arm, and you get to Redbird Utility Operating Company, comma, LLC.
Yes.
You've identified it on this chart as Redbird UOC, comma, LLC. All right, so in your materials that you filed in this docket, you all provided, I've already referenced the attachment number, but you all provided, which one is it? Is it J? And J, Articles of Organization for CSWR North Carolina and the name change to the Redbird Utility Holding Company, LLC. So, so we have that documentation in the record. My question for you is this: is there really an entity that's North Carolina CSWR, comma, LLC? Does that entity really exist?
Ma'am, can I get back to you on that in terms of how the holding company there is organized? If it's listed here, then I believe it does exist, but I have to go back and check that.
All right, Mr. Higgins, you got another assignment here. Please confirm whether North Carolina CSWR, comma, LLC is an existing entity in North Carolina, or at least is in good standing in North Carolina. And then similarly with the Redbird Utility Operating Company, comma, LLC, there's no evidence in the record at this time, other than the testimony of Mr. Cox, that it is an entity in good standing in North Carolina. I'd like to see evidence of that. Just to augment the witness's testimony.
Understood.
Okay. And so in short, I'd like for the applicant to confirm or correct the accuracy or ensure the accuracy of this org chart as pertains to the North Carolina entities. Okay, let's see. All right, turning to the Bear Den entities. Did you negotiate the agreement on behalf of the company, on behalf of the Central States organization?
I did not negotiate this agreement. We have
Who-
a business development personnel who negotiate this agreement.
Okay. Were you involved with that transaction, even though you didn't negotiate it directly? Did you oversee it? Did you have knowledge of it, any information about it while it was ongoing?
I was not directly involved in negotiations at all.
Do you know Mr. Kraus?
I do not.
But before today, were you aware of the existence of this second Bear Den entity, which is the Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc.?
I believe that was in the title search. I was not brought up to the title until the last couple of days, and this came out as a commission issue.
Okay, so just confirming, you've had no interaction with Mr. Kraus?
I have not.
Okay. Can you help the commission understand why, so why is the entity that entered into the agreement to sell a different entity than actually owns the assets? How did that happen?
Well, just to be clear, that's not correct. That there's some of the assets that are owned by this development company.
Okay,
So
which of those assets?
it's some of the easements and lines. So that's the not the
But,
parts.
but this, we don't really know about the status. Let me back up a little bit. And just for purposes of clarity of the record, the deed or the deed that has now been, has it been introduced?
Yes.
The deed that's now in the record has that paragraph that acknowledges that grantee is purchasing all of the stock of Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. So while I don't know whether that stock purchase actually occurred, it's identified in this document. So I don't know that Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. actually owns anything at this point. So that's my question.
Yeah,
I haven't asked, that's my comment, not a question to you.
Could I offer something?
Let me ask you a question first before you respond. I need the company to help us understand the status of Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc. and the status of Bear Den Acres, Inc.
Development.
Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. And who, and which of those two Bear Den entities owns the assets that Central States Water Resources, Inc. seeks to acquire?
Yes, ma'am. And I believe what we will do is a whole new contract that covers all these bases with all the assets in a single document. I mean, this is standard for us in terms of how discombobulated it is with these small owners, but we do not have a problem with cleaning all that up.
I would ask that the company file as a late, subject to Commissioner Brownbland's
I would
approval.
order the same.
Okay. I'd ask that the company file as a late filed exhibit, a revised agreement for the sale of utility assets or purchase of utility assets that supplants the agreement and previously entered into.
That's our plan.
Okay. And it would be helpful if at the same time the company filed a revised application as well. Commissioner Brownbland.
Just to be clear, the request is that you file documents that in whole substitute for these that have been filed, both the application and the agreements between the parties. And as I understood Mr. Cox, we need Bear Den Acres Development, Inc. and Bear Den Mountain Resort, Inc.
To
As
be determined.
parties. Because I understood him to say he needed some interest to have everything that is required to operate the system. He needs some interest from the Development, Inc., and he needs some interest from the Mountain Resort, Inc. Subject to legal research.
Yes, our plan is to make sure it's holistic and fully encompassing in a single document.
Inaccurate.
And in addition, if you were to determine that some aspect of that is not needed, because the commission does have questions around this ownership. We can only deal with the parties that are properly before us. And also, I mean, it has to be accurate. So if for some reason you make a determination that you have, what you have is sufficient, or you can't get the other, then we would need a briefing, a legal briefing on.
We don't anticipate there being any issue in filing a new asset purchase agreement that has two sellers and covers the assets that each of them is conveying to Redbird Water Operating Company.
And also, with regard to the org chart and the entities that are implicated here from CSWR on down, all the way down to Redbird Operating, if you would just indicate file something that indicates the roles that each has in the relationship to this transaction, where they are either originated, authorized to do business, and their good standing. Have we added enough homework?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Mr. Higgins, if you have any follow-up for clarification of the record, you may ask Mr. Cox. Otherwise,
I don't have any further questions, Mr. Cox.
all right, watch your step, Mr. Cox, and you may
Yes,
be
ma'am. Thank you.
excused. Is there anything else from the applicant?
No, ma'am, that's the case for the applicant.
All right. We'll hear from the public staff.
Before we call our witness, there is one housekeeping matter that I'd like to bring up. And that is to move admission of the settlement agreement and stipulation between Redbird and the public staff.
And are you convinced you have all the proper parties, Ms. Yost?
I think we
We-
could,
Yes, I think we do have the proper parties, but
I think if after all of the homework is done, we determine that there needs to be an amended stipulation, then we will file the same.
So at this point, you've moved the stipulation agreement?
That's correct.
Settle
Filed on
stipulation?
March 2nd.
Correct. All right, without objection, that motion is allowed. The settlement agreement and stipulation filed March 2nd, 2022 between Redbird Utility Operating Company LLC and the public staff be received into evidence.
Thank you. At this time, the public staff calls D. Michael Franklin.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you sincerely and solemnly swear that the testimony you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I did.
All right, Ms. Yes.
Please state your name, business address, and current position for the record.
My name is D. Michael Franklin. My business address is 430 North Salisbury Street, Raleigh. And my present position is I'm a public utilities engineer with the public staff, water, sewer, and telephone division.
On March 18th, 2022, did you prepare and cause to be filed in this docket settlement testimony consisting of 10 pages and an Appendix A?
I did.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
I do not.
If you were asked the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
I request that the pre-filed settlement testimony of Mr. Franklin be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Without objection, that motion is allowed.
Mr. Franklin, have you prepared a summary of your testimony?
I have.
Commissioner Brown-Forland, would you like him to read that, or I believe everybody has received a copy. We're happy to dispense with the reading.
You may read it.
Okay. The purpose of my settlement testimony filed on March 18, 2022 is to provide support for the settlement agreement and stipulation filed on March 2nd, 2022 by Redbird Utility Operating Company, LLC, Redbird, and the public staff, collectively the stipulating parties. Based on my investigation of the application for transfer of public utility franchise and for approval of rates filed by Redbird and Bear Dan Acres Development Incorporated. As a result of give and take negotiations to settle the contested issues, the stipulating parties stipulate and agree as follows. Redbird agrees to post a bond in the amount of $75,000 for the Bear Den Acres service area on or before March 18, 2022. The transfer of the Bear Den Acres system to Redbird should be approved. Redbird agrees not to pursue an acquisition adjustment related to the Bear Den Acres system in this or any future proceeding. The stipulating parties agree that the rate base for the Bear Den Acres system should be $3,153 plus up to $5,000 for closing costs. The actual amount of the closing costs should be determined in Redbird's next general rate case. The stipulating parties agree that Redbird may request recovery of the remaining costs associated with the transfer of the Bear Den Acres system to Redbird up to $25,496 for engineering due diligence work in its next general rate case, provided that the resulting work results in reasonable and prudent capital investments to improve the Bear Den Acres system. Any portion of the $25,496 associated with the reasonable and prudent improvements should be included as utility plant in service in the company's next general rate case, filed after the improvements become used and useful in providing service. Redbird agrees not to seek recovery of any additional costs associated with the transfer, including due diligence, transactional, and regulatory costs, other than those listed in items 4 and 5 above. This completes my summary.
All right, the parties have agreed to waive cross-examination, so Mr. Franklin is available for questions from the committee.
All right. Mr. Franklin, just to start us out, have you physically visited the system?
I did in July of 2021.
And you've been in the hearing room the whole time. Could you give us your description of what is there and what the two systems are like? Just give us a feel for the customers, the systems, what they serve, what makes up the system.
Okay, so the system is composed of 50 to 55 residents that are individual homes. Some are smaller in nature, and I would characterize them as seasonal. And the campground water system was separated from the residential service by order of DEQ back in 1993. So in 1993, the owners of the water system, DEQ determined that the water providing the residents was a communal water system, and as such, they had to upgrade the supply and distribution system. So Bear Den was given the owners of Bear Den, of that water system, were given two options: either upgrade the entire system, including the campground, or detach itself from the campground water system and upgrade just the residential. And the owners chose the latter. They chose to just disengage from the campground and instead upgrade just the residential water system. So there are now two DEQ permits, one for the campground and one for the residential portion. The CPCN only covers the residential. The Utilities Commission does not regulate, to my knowledge, the campground water system.
All right. If you can explain that to me, because I believe the CPCN initially was issued in the name of the development company and the campground as one system. So what DEQ did not change the public utility, did it, or do you know?
I believe it did, because in sub two is when they separated, they changed the name just to remove the campground. And the reason why the customer requested it be removed is for the reasons I just told you about the systems being separated, and they no longer own or operate the campground system.
Company no longer owns the campground system, but yet the campground is a part of this transaction. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think the campground is part of the transaction, no.
All right. So in public staff's view, the transaction is only about the 55 customers only?
That's correct.
And it's a campground, in your opinion, the campground has been left unregulated?
That's correct, because it's a campground.
This commission does regulate or has regulated campgrounds, I know.
That's my understanding. I could be incorrect, but that's my understanding, reading the various submittals for this docket.
Do you know anything about how many connections there are in the campground? How many customers get served?
I do not,
Anything about their water usage?
do not.
Okay. Now, so if this transaction is completed, which organization does the public staff understands will ultimately own the assets and the franchise of what is now Verdine?
Redbird,
Redbird,
utility operating company.
all right. And so the assets and the franchise will be in the same company.
Yes,
Now, we understand from Mr. Cox's testimony that 8 other states are part of the Redbird affiliate group. Are you able to, and as well as Ocean Terrace and Pine Knoll Town Systems, which were recently acquired in North Carolina, are you able to tell the commission anything regarding the affiliate group's utility operations in the other states? Did you do any research into those?
the only one that I have followed is I believe it's called Bluebird in the state of Kentucky. And I am subscribed to their docket system for Bluebird applications. And so I get periodically updates on the status of those various dockets.
Could you determine anything about their record of service to the customers and the operational compliance?
I have not seen any concerns with operational or regulatory compliance. Most of the complaints have been associated with an increase in rates.
Prior to the commission indicating that it had some questions for both parties regarding ownership that stemmed from the consumer statements about the restrictive covenants and the Water Association. Was the public staff aware of the restrictive covenants?
No,
So it's just recently come to your attention.
that's correct.
You know, in In docket number W-1040 sub 2, Bear Den filed a request for a rate increase and a name change to Bear Den Campground, and the subsequent filings refer to the company as Bear Den Acres Development. I think I may know this, but I'm just asking you to get it clear on the record. Does the public staff have any records on the name changes for Bear Den?
Any records? Yes, we have the hard copy file of that sub 2. And most of the content, we believe.
All right. Just to be able to get that in the record I would request that the public staff file that in the docket to augment the record in this proceeding. The information on the name change. And because of, so prior to what you heard here today about the mountain resort coming into it, were you aware of the mountain resort, Bear Den Mountain Resort's ownership or involvement?
Right, we had submitted a data request to Redbird requesting for deeds. And we saw in the deeds that there were basically two different entities, but they were both showed Mr. Mark Kraus as the president. And we did not pursue that further because our thought was that it is Redbird's obligation to ensure they had all the correct easements.
The commission asked the public staff to also look further into the ownership and name change issue here. Just again, to help us assure that should we go forward, that we have what we have, that we have the proper parties. And when I say have what we have, that we have what we need to assure that the assets in the franchise are in one entity name over whom this commission has jurisdiction at the time of any subsequent order. The next question is about the billing. The public staff has projected the average monthly water bill post-acquisition of the system, and it's been noted that these projected average water bills were based on 1,500 gallons of water usage in year one, in the year one projection in the first 2 months of year two. Could you explain how the average monthly water usage of 1,500 gallons was calculated?
Yes, I received in a data request, I received usage information, and I averaged that usage information out over, I believe, 3 years, and came up with that amount.
So what was the average water usage that was used to calculate the average monthly water bill for the rest of the year two, as well as 3 through 5?
It was the same. I didn't change the average usage as I recall.
So still the 1,500 gallons. All right. And the Bear Den serves 55 residential customers. Is that what you've determined and you agree with?
Yes,
And does Bear Den serve other customers besides residential, other types, other classifications?
not that I'm aware of, no.
And you don't believe Bear Den, or do you believe Bear Den currently serves the members of the campground?
I believe they do not, based on the information that's in the sub 2.
And you believe these two systems no longer have a relationship?
That's correct.
All right. And you've indicated that the 55 residences, you do consider them to be seasonal in their water usage.
That's correct.
Do any of the residents, to your knowledge, receive service year round? Use the water year round?
I believe some, based on, as I recall from reviewing the usage records, there were some that did. I don't remember the amount, but it seemed like it was approximately a third. as I recall.
Chair Mitchell.
All right, Mr. Franklin, just a few questions for you. First, I'm confused about the campground situation. I think we all are, but help me understand, because the way I read the application and the way I understand the testimony provided by the applicant today, the campground would be included, or is intended to be included in this transfer. Have you had discussions with the applicant about the campground?
No, I have not.
Okay. Any reason to think, I mean, why would, I'm not asking you to speculate on behalf of the applicant, but why, help me understand what's going on here. I mean, why would the applicant think that the campground is part of this transaction?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I can't answer that question. Again, I'm going by the information that I saw in sub 2.
Okay.
And based on that information, it appeared to me that the CPCN was revised in sub 2. And because of the systems were disconnected, that it only applied to the residential area and not the campground.
So so help me, what was the date of the order in sub 2? Do you have that on hand?
Yeah. It had a recommended order, and then that order became final on May 4th, 1996.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so setting aside for the moment the issue of the campground, did you hear Mr. Cox's testimony today about the company's service track record
Yes.
and sort of approach to resolving service requests and service complaints?
Yes.
Did the public staff investigate the company's service record in other jurisdictions in which the affiliates of the company are active?
Like I said, the one that I followed more closely was Kentucky. I did try to find some additional information in some of the other states, but Kentucky, it was just easier to obtain the information. And again, I didn't see any significant service issues, I'll put it that way.
Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's fine.
Okay, so you have no basis upon which to refute the testimony today of Mr. Cox?
No.
Okay. Okay. Has the public staff been made aware of the contract operators that the company is engaged with?
We are aware that they have no North Carolina employees, that Redbird has no North Carolina employees, and that all operations will be contracted out. We are aware of that.
Does the public staff have any concerns about the fact that the company will have no employees located in North Carolina?
Yes, we do.
Does the public staff have confidence in the contract operators with which the company is engaged or intends to engage?
We only know of the contract operator that was being used currently at Ocean Terrace and Pinedale Towns 1, 2, and 3. That was in the sub 7 that was approved. And that was the current operator that had currently been used, and we had no issues with that. I'll just add that this mode of operation by Central States is not unique to North Carolina. My understanding is in all the other states, they have a similar operation where they have no, except for possibly Missouri, they don't have any employees in the state. It's all contracted out.
Okay. And does the public staff have specific concerns with this business model?
Again, just because there are no employees that if there was a major outage or something significant, it may take longer for the company to respond. And
The,
oversight as well.
okay. The, Mr. Franklin, have you seen the 3 and I think actually 4 customer
Yes,
statements of position that have been put on the record in this case?
yes.
Are you aware, did the public staff receive any other inquiries or expressions of statement from customers
No,
other than these 4?
that's the only ones we received that I'm aware of.
When you were on location, you indicated that in July, I think it's 2020, is that right, or 2021?
2021.
July 2021, when you were on location, did you speak to any customers at that time?
No, I went with the DEQ person who's assigned to that system. I looked at meters, and of course, we looked at the system, but I didn't come across any residents that approached me, and quite honestly, I didn't approach any of them either.
All right. What was your impression upon visual inspection of the system, that which you could see?
I thought the system was being maintained. I didn't see any major issues of concern. I spoke with DEQ. There had not been violations of the system recently. And there are some equipment, for example, the storage tank. I believe the level meter wasn't working properly. But other than that, the only other concern that DEQ expressed is that they were having difficulty controlling pH at one time, and they had switched from soda ash to using caustic, but that requires additional equipment be installed and more continuous oversight. And they went back to soda, and that has controlled the pH since then, so they have not had the need to go to caustic, but the operator felt that at some point they would have to go to a caustic system.
Were you able to identify any information about the capacity of I believe there are 2 wells, the capacity of the 2 wells?
Mm-hmm. As I recall, they only need to use one at a time. They don't need to use them both. But I don't recall the specific information as far as their capacity for, but it fills the storage tank, and then the storage tank is used to distribute it to the rest of to the residents.
And to your knowledge, to date, there have been no issues with capacity or availability of water supply?
No, and I also asked Consumer Services if they had received any complaints, and asked them to go back to January 1st of 2019, and they had not received any complaints.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Franklin.
Commissioner Hughes, you have any questions?
Yeah. Do you know if these 2 separate systems have the ability to send water back and forth?
They do not.
So they're physically disconnected?
Yes, correct.
All right, Mr. Franklin, given that you responded to questions from Chair Mitchell, that you did not see any violations, you didn't see much, if any concerns on your visit, that the system appeared to be well maintained, what benefits do the 55 customers get out of this transfer transaction?
Well, the system is old, and there was galvanized pipe used for the mains, and so it's just a matter of time before those will need to be replaced. We talked briefly with Mr. Cox about the meters, and again, the meters, were installed in the 93, 95 timeframe. So most likely they're going to need to be replaced. So we see some capital investments that are going to be required and feel that with the assets Redbird has, they're more capable of making any of those capital investments that might be required.
Now, in your research, going back to the DEQ separation of the systems, did you see anything that indicated either the public staff or the commission followed up with regard to the campground? Or whether there was a gap created, whether the campground should remain under regulation? Did you come across any information?
I did not.
Ms. Yost, I would ask that the public staff follow up to find out whether that campground should be subject to regulation or not under the regulatory scheme of Chapter 62. And also, well, that's all I would request at this time on the public staff. Another question for you, Mr. Franklin, is whether when the system was separated, do you know from an accounting point of view whether the original investment was also separated out from the campground?
Looking through the sub 2 documentation, they added plant investment for years 1993, 94, and 95. I did not see, to my recollection, I did not see anything prior to that as original plant, but I would have to check. I may be incorrect, but that's my recollection.
All right. All right. Are there questions or follow-up to the commission's questions? Mr. Higgins,
I don't have any questions for Mr. Franklin.
Ms. Yost,
No questions.
all right, then looks like, I don't think you had any exhibits to your testimony.
Did not.
So it looks like you may be excused, Mr. Franklin. I would like to just comment that you can tell from the looks on our faces and the questions we've asked, we're a little bit perplexed, and we think this one is a little bit of a mess and there's some things to clean up here. So we would ask that you do that as soon as you can. And also, let's be sure that we are in agreement and understanding what the service area will be or is proposed to be.
Commissioner Bland, on that point, I don't think my client has ever thought that the service area was anything other than the 55 residences that Mr. Franklin referred to. That has been, I mean, the name campground appears in the record in some of the original dockets, but that's my understanding of what the parties have contemplated.
All right.
So, but we will proceed with dispatch to do what you've asked of us, to provide these additional and cleanup items and a clean asset purchase agreement that addresses the issues that have been identified.
I would ask that if possible, that the parties attempt to provide the requested late filed exhibits and other additional information that we've asked you to follow up on. If we could have those answers and responses within 3 weeks from today's date. And if we cannot, that you would contact our commission staff to let them know that additional time is needed and to request such. Beyond that, I would ask that proposed orders and any briefs of any issues you find appropriate to be briefed be filed within 30 days of the availability of the transcript. Is that acceptable?
Yes, ma'am.
Any other matter that needs to be addressed before we adjourn?
No, ma'am, not for me.
Not from the public staff. Thank you.
All right, I believe we've admitted everything that we needed to today in the evidence. And so with that, we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.